Hi, today I'm here with Andrew Didway, and Andrew works in community mental health in Portland, Oregon, and has contacted me to talk about some of the concerns that he has about, well, a lot of the way things are being done. It sounds like there are problems that are related to mismanagement and funding, as well as some problems that are related to the way that we're implementing social justice concepts in this sphere. But I'll let you kind of set the scene. And would you mind first saying a little bit about your background and what got you in, what made you want to work in that field, and just tell a little bit
Yeah,
about your life? Yeah.
yeah. So I'm 41, originally from Dallas, Texas, San Antonio, Texas. Joined the Marine Corps straight out of high school. Spent 5 years serving in the Marines. And when I got out of the Marines, I got into aviation. So most of my adult life has been in aviation and prosthetics, kind of technical jobs. When I was 25, I got pretty ill with a autoimmune disorder. And because of the issues and pain that I was having, I got prescribed opiates and found that they worked just as well for emotional pain as they did physical pain, and kind of fell into addiction. Uh, just being diagnosed and having those challenges like really impacted me psychologically. Um, And I got into meditation when I want to say 32, and I started attending silent 10-day meditation retreats. Got heavily involved in meditation, saw so much benefit from it. Um, I kind of was reaching a point, I was working for Boeing, I was what's considered successful. My body couldn't really handle it, and I felt like my life was kind of lacking meaning. And so I decided to go live at a Buddhist temple. And so I did that for 3 years. And when I left the temple, I decided I wanted to kind of get into mental health. And, if my experience, with addiction and then, like my training in meditation, mindfulness could help others, and so that's when I got into community mental health. That was 2016. Yeah.
Okay. So you'd had this experience of becoming very ill, and then becoming addicted to opiates. And
Yeah.
somehow you worked your own way through that. You worked your way through addiction through finding Buddhism and meditation practices. And you wanted to work with other people who were dealing with those same issues. And
Yeah.
that's what brought you to this. And you said you were working is it a peer consultant, or what's the specific role that you took on?
So I was working as a peer support specialist. In a residential, it's a transitional housing for at-risk youth. So we worked with kids coming out of the foster care system, 18 to 24, some kids coming out of the criminal justice system, kids who were homeless. And yeah, that was like my first taste of the dysfunction, toxicity, and just kind of abusive environments of some of these, community mental health workplaces.
What year was that you started working?
That was 2016, and I worked at this particular place until I want to say 2019, 2020. No, probably no. I'm sorry, that was 2018. Sorry,
Okay. Okay.
2018,
So
and I worked. Yeah,
late teens. So was this before you started to have issues with around some of the social justice like stuff? This is unrelated to that. There's just other problems in the system.
right, right. I certainly when I moved to Portland, I found that community mental health wasn't really. I think it's been completely taken over, and even just some of the mental health terminology, the jargon, approaches. You just don't even hear about that anymore. So yeah, I moved up to Portland a year ago. Yeah, just a little over a year ago. I got accepted into a psilocybin facilitator training, so I made the move to Portland, and got a job working at another community mental health, and And, right off the bat, like in my orientation for this company, they had a short section on intersectionality, right? And it was done by a social justice activist employee. And at one point in the presentation, they said, at some point in this training, there's always like some old white man who talks about how they were poor. And it's like, well, that just doesn't really, that doesn't fit in with this model. And we don't really, it's kind of like inconsequential. And that was like my first clue. And I was like, wow. And from my perspective, I think if you do like a quick thought experiment and you have two white men and one of them's like a upper executive or lower, executive, they work for the same company, and you have maybe a warehouse manager who comes from a lower middle class background. They both steal $25,000 from the company, right? They're both going to be treated radically different in the criminal justice system. And one of them is going to have way more access to resources, right? And so you can just plug in any group that you want into those, and you're going to see two different outcomes. And I get, I see intersectionality as a useful tool for analysis, but it's being used and to actually treat people differently based on, and it's, we can get into that in my story about how it's being used within these workplaces.
So they were training you using this model from the outset. And was this intended to help train peer support specialists who were going to be able to be more sensitive toward clients from certain backgrounds? Or was it meant to be a helpful framework for understanding different kinds of adversity that people will have faced? Or what was that for, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I try to give it the benefit of the doubt, and it seems like it was initially presented as, like this is a helpful tool so that you can maybe empathize or understand, some of the challenges that people might face. But also some of the approach, first of all, it was just like a 2 hour thing, it wasn't in depth. And I think the way it was presented, it wasn't, and then again, just some of my other experiences there where it's being weaponized, right?
Well, I'd love to let you get into some of those experiences, because when we were talking about this before, there were a lot of moving parts. And yeah, so you had this training, and
Right.
and then after that, what was your experience working in the field?
Yeah, so I want to, I'll get into like some of the more uh, that whole conversation with all the moving parts in a minute. But like, there were times where, myself and one of my coworkers were doing outreach, and they had recently hired this new person, and they insisted that they go out on outreach with us. And and they were like, because of, how and they were kind of like hesitant and trying to find words to express it because of how you identify. And so I was like, well, how do I identify? And they were like, it was like a cis white man. And so it was just kind of, and I encountered stuff like that quite often, right? We'd be in these meetings and it would just come up like, oh, well, cis white men, and it's, so first of all, I was working in that environment, right? So I got hired on to work at a drop-in center. It was about a month in, I found out that that the manager of that drop-in center was actually married to a VP, and that VP had been the former manager of that same drop-in center. And then a couple months later, I learned that that VP who ran the drop in center hired their spouse to work directly under them. And then they promoted their spouse to the supervisor position underneath them as a program manager. So that like definitely raised some red flags to me. I definitely, at the place I worked at in California, there was some nepotism. There was a staff there who was like borrowed money from one of the clients, and they were no disciplinary action was taken. And so enough of the staff were like, this is like definitely crossing a lot of boundaries. And so they were kind of forced to fire them, but then they were rehired 30 days later. And there was a lot of instances like that of just like nepotism. And yeah, and so I was working at this drop-in center. And then, so I'd been working there about a year. And then this last July, it was brought to my attention that my manager had accused me of hate speech and harassment.
Your current manager, not the manager of that other one, or
No, my
your
last
old manager?
manager.
Okay, okay,
Yeah, one of my new managers is the spouse of my old manager, and that's going to come up.
okay.
Like I said, I almost need a whiteboard to like
Yeah,
illustrate the
yeah.
moving parts.
So one of your managers, who's the spouse of your former manager.
No,
Let's walk through it again real quick. So,
okay.
okay. What's the
So
relationship? Okay. Sorry.
I'm sorry. So this incident that happened in July was my former manager. I was still at the old program.
Okay.
I just recently transitioned to a new program, partly to escape that.
The dynamic there.
Right. And so one of my new managers is this old manager's spouse. So like,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So you're finding out that your old manager had made a complaint about you saying that you were using hate speech.
Right. And so the specific incident, we were doing like team building. So we were playing dominoes, and they had mentioned that they were, going to go to the Pride Parade here in Portland. And they said, I don't really, I have some issues with that community. They're trans, right? But I'm going to go show my support because there's a lot of Proud Boys there, and there's just a lot of hate around. Like heteronormative people are being really hateful, and they said that 7 states like made it illegal to be trans, and so I was like, that's not accurate. 7 states made it illegal for physicians to prescribe puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones to minors, to people under 18. And and I was basically like, they may have a totally different perspective, and they may like, you may not agree with it or accept it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all those people are filled with hate. And that was like essentially what I was saying. So the HR found that they said that both of our stories matched up, and they said that the specific language they used was that my boss's claims were unfounded.
Okay.
But in the course of doing that investigation, right, it came to light that my boss was, they were putting jokes on like the group chat about having federal law enforcement like arrest and round up like straight people. And they were making jokes about getting phalloplasties and thinking long and hard about it. And I was like, I didn't
just kind of inappropriate.
Right. And then they were like, get it long and hard. And I'm like, oh, okay. And yeah, just like the general tone of, like comparing all straight people to Proud Boys. They had done that before. And so they found that they were in violation of the agency's harassment policy.
Okay.
So that they concluded that investigation August 18th, right?
Okay. So just to recap that, it sounds like your boss made a claim against you, said that you were using hate speech because you wanted to clarify a point around this. So you're sort of hanging out, spending time playing dominoes, having a chat, and your boss says something about all trans people being illegal in 7 states. There's making it illegal to be trans in 7 states, and you clarified, no, that's not the law. It's this, and that was enough for your boss to claim hate speech.
Right.
And it sounds like you're very respectful of the pronouns that are preferred. I'm hearing you say they a lot. I'm imagining that's not a plural they. You're talking about this individual who wants to be referred to this way. So you're generally going along with this, not making waves, being respectful, but you wanted to clarify the factual error that was being made, and that was taken as hate speech by your boss. Made a claim. You were cleared after the investigation, but in the process, they looked at what your boss had actually been saying, and your boss was found to be guilty of harassment.
Right. Right.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And so August 18th, I get an email from HR saying they concluded the investigation and found that my boss had been in violation of the harassment policy. And then August 24th, so from August 18th to August 24th, I was made aware of some other incident that actually preceded this July incident and
Okay.
happened in May or June. And it was my old boss's spouse, who's now one of my new bosses, who made the allegation.
Okay. So that sounds like very potentially retaliation. So this didn't pan out. So we're going to call you out for something that happened a long time ago. And
Right.
since these two people are so closely linked, it feels retaliatory.
Right. They have to see how bad this looks, right? And I mean, it feels, and then, I mean, given, like, just, I felt like, when I was in this meeting with HR addressing this claim from May, I was like, well, this happened, like about 5 weeks prior to this July incident, and it's just now coming up, And one of the VP of diversity said, well, it was just brought to our attention. And so, later on in the conversation, I asked again, and I'm like, this was just brought to your attention by the spouse of my former boss, who I just had an investigation with. And the other woman in there, the HR business partner, said, well, we've had it. We just lost track of it. And so the whole thing just felt super dishonest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Super dishonest. And the whole tone of the conversation was surreal. I had made a book recommendation,
This is
and
the substance of the claim against you? A book recommendation? Okay.
a book recommendation, and I thanked them for having the conversation with me. And so they were like, well, did you thank them as a trans person? And then, they said, the VP of diversity said, well, I didn't read the book, but I read some reviews on it, and this book doesn't align with our values.
So what is the book? Was it?
So it's The Coddling of the American Mind.
Okay.
Right? Which I know a lot of people bristle at.
I thought it was a great book.
It's excellent. And so within the context of the conversation I had, I don't think it was inappropriate at all. So myself and my new boss's boss, another program, 3 people quit because this young person, 22 years old, started identifying as non-binary at work and really just kind of created a really toxic environment, was bullying people, was insisting that mental health patients be banned for misgendering them. So 3 people had quit. So myself and my new boss, we had to go there as support. They were short, and so she pulled me into the room and was like kind of giving me the rundown of what happened. Like, I was already aware of it because one of my friends was one who quit, but she was expressing to me. She said, well, it's really alarming that a lot of young people seem to be lacking empathy. And I said, yeah, and they're lacking communication skills. They don't, And then I said, oh, this book that I'm reading, The Coddling American Mind, talks about this like in depth, So it was within the context of that conversation that I made that book recommendation.
Okay.
And yeah, Yeah.
So that book, making that book recommendation was harassment, or at least to this person. They used that as the basis of a harassment claim
Right.
against you. And there's so much irony in that. If you read that book, that is it's really rich. And I wonder what does thinking someone as a trans person mean?
I guess, it would be like, or, if, I don't know, like if, as an example, like if you're speaking with like a Muslim person, right?
Yeah.
And you were to say, "Oh, thank you for sharing your perspective," like, because it's good to like hearing somebody else's perspective, right? As that group, I guess. And so that's what they were clarifying. Like, was I thanking them as a trans person or what?
What a strange thing to have to think about. Like you have to pay some kind of homage to their group membership in order to not be guilty of harassment. Like you're supposed to acknowledge their their group level identity when talking with them, or else you have slighted them somehow.
Right. Or I think they were saying that I did thank them and for their sharing their perspective as a member of that group identity, or they were trying to clarify that.
Okay. So which way was bad? Was it bad to think them as a trans person or bad to think them as an individual?
I still don't know.
Wow.
And
Are you
and they
still
have
in? Sorry, go ahead, please.
no, and so they have within the harassment policy they have this super vague. It's microaggressions, right? Which could be
Hmm.
anything,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's just completely subjective.
right, right, and yeah, there's so many layers of irony, and here we were having a conversation about this non-binary person bullying people in the workplace, and then here you are bullying me, and it's yeah, I mean, like I said, that conversation was surreal. The whole thing is surreal.
So the non-binary person bullying people, uh, that's that's really interesting. And that's kind of when I was wondering initially, your DEI training, was it in order to help the peer support specialists to be more to recognize different things in their clients and be sensitive toward those things? Or in this case, you have somebody who is kind of weaponizing that from the other direction and saying, I am not going to even provide the support that I've been hired to provide unless people are acknowledging me in the way that I want to be acknowledged according to this like identity concept that I've adopted.
Right. And that's the real shame of it, is that there were a couple of targeted individuals who were patients there on referral who were denied services, or there was this insistence that they be denied services. One patient was just, they couldn't be in the same space as this individual, right? But it affected all the other people, right? That utilize that program, staff and participants, patients.
Because everybody's
Um,
having to make exceptions and be very careful around this one person.
right, right. And it's interesting because the like to me, it's like classic bullying. It's weaponizing a marginalized identity. And I was thinking about it, and my old boss, if you as soon as you meet them, they're like, "Oh, I'm a trans, autistic, neurodivergent," and I was like, and somebody had asked me, they were like, "Oh, you work for this person. What's that like?" Like they seem really narcissistic, and I was like, "Oh, like of course they are." But then I was thinking just recently, like within this culture, that's them establishing dominance, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's them establishing power, because the more you have on that intersectionality, that like the more people are supposed to, and I think that's, that initial July
Mm-hmm.
incident
Mm-hmm.
is what it was. Like, I think that they legitimately feel I'm not just supposed to affirm their identity. I'm just supposed to affirm everything. and I'm not somebody that goes around initiating conversations around controversial topics, right? But if somebody's initiates a conversation, like I engage in that in good faith, and I think I'm thoughtful, and I try to be skillful, but I don't. I think it's done in bad faith. I think
Mm-hmm.
these people are utilizing their identity, right? Whatever that means. They're
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
utilizing policy and procedure and the current social climate and the culture, to bully people.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like that's the way it's playing out. And one of the really big ironies of that situation is that social justice is supposed to be all about helping the most downtrodden, or I almost don't even want to use their language. I don't want to say the word marginalized, but so
Right.
we'll talk about people who are disadvantaged. And
Right.
you're working with a population of people who are experiencing addiction and homelessness, and you have you have the feelings, the subjective feelings of your staff being placed over and above. And if hate speech is something like, no, it's not that trans people are illegal, it's that these procedures have been um, outlawed for these age groups.
Right.
So that if that's hate speech, then what kind of offenses were being given? I can imagine that there's some line, and there's usually some line in any kind of service position where you don't have to put up with abuse from your client. You don't, if somebody's breaking the law in their treatment of you, you don't have to keep doing that. And there's some level of before law breaking where that comes into play. But you would think with people who are really, really struggling, they're sort of rock bottom, that
Right.
you'd want to give some grace. And yet, if your level of sensitivity is so high, and so was this being accommodated by the group, or did this person eventually have to stop pushing? I guess I'm focusing a lot on that non-binary person because that really surprises me that was happening in the workplace.
No, it was really surprising. Yeah. So one of, my friends worked there in that program. Um, and I think talking to him, they had a new manager, inexperienced. Again, this goes back to this kind of inexperienced managers so anyway, she was inexperienced. She's probably about 25, 26. And she admitted as much. She was like, we just didn't know what to do about it, you know? And I was telling my friend, like, y'all need to communicate this with leadership, right? Um, so they did, and they ended up shutting down the program, like I said, a couple of times to have these meetings. And I think they were trying to accommodate to a certain extent, but they were also like saying, like, no, like you have to extend some grace, to the people that we're serving, right? Like, it isn't all, um, and so, yeah, like, so I worked there, right? Like when I first got hired on, I worked at this particular program for 2 months. I left, and then I came back to help out. It was like almost a rule that you had to declare your pronouns. So
Mm.
they got some concessions too, right? You could tell that they were really pushing this, and it's, it is what it is. But yeah, I mean, it really is, this field is becoming dominated by social justice, capital S, capital J, which is totally different from like what,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I
Mm-hmm.
think like you said, like disadvantaged people, like I think a lot of people, and I think that's how they hook people, right? They
Yep.
tug on people's emotions. And, like I shared in a group the other day, like Jonathan Haidt talks about, moral judgments being like aesthetic ones,
Mm-hmm.
like you walk into a room and it feels good or it doesn't. And then you piece together why it feels good. Oh, the lighting. Oh, the flooring. It's the same way with moral judgments. And so people are being inundated, like NPR, MSNBC, and, like, oh, well, why, how could you not want to do this, But then when you scratch the surface, you're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
wait.
Mm-hmm.
And just about a year and a half ago, I was very much, I mean, I wasn't fully on board, right? I still saw the dangers of like medicalization of, like children. And I saw some of
Mm-hmm.
the dangerous language behind the race thing, but I was
Mm-hmm.
still very much like, like my friends in Texas, like a lot of them are Trump supporters. And I would like, oh my God, like I can't, I was like very like condemning them,
Mm-hmm.
and now I like pulled out of this media cycle and I was like, wait, what the hell was I doing? Like, you know, um, but I can see it, and yeah, but the mental health field is just totally, it isn't mental health anymore. Like they really just need to, I mean, be honest about what it is.
It sounds like there's a large representation of trans identified people working in the organizations you've been working for.
Yeah. And so at the place I was working at in California, there was a trans identified um, therapist, right? Associate therapist. They were getting their hours and news spread quickly. Like this person was like essentially bullying everybody, like
Mm-hmm.
for the pronoun thing and the misgendering. And this is rural Northern California. This is in San Francisco. Like people are like, let people, don't put that, don't put that much pressure on people. And so, but yeah, like, so where I work, the program I left, another staff member left about a month before I did. They were replaced with a trans identified male lesbian. So that's a man who identifies as a female and lesbian. I left and I was replaced by another trans person. So now you have a trans manager and two trans staff, and doesn't really reflect the population that they're supposed to be serving. But also, when I left, there was nobody coming in, nobody getting services.
I was going to ask you, um, is this who's applying for these jobs, or is there sort of a recruitment that favors this? Do you have a sense of that?
I think it's both. I think
Mm,
it's people that want to change the world, and then
mm,
this kind of confusion or conflation of like community mental health with social justice activism. And
hmm.
they have this new DEI program that they started in 2022. And yeah, I think it attracts. And also, this is Portland. Like this is
Hmm.
a very, very, very different place. And I try to tell people like I agree with like 90%. Like I 100% support people in being who they are, right? But I also just don't think it should be taught to children. I think it's developmentally inappropriate. It confuses children. I think we're medicalizing them, and performing irreversible procedures, and like, the whole notion that you could just put a pause on puberty, like it's like
Hmm.
one of the most profound physiological changes a human being can go through, and you're just going to pause it, like,
Hmm.
um, so, but yeah, I agree with like 90% of it, but it's just those things. But like just those two, objections or views that I think are perfectly reasonable. Like I can't
Hmm.
even express those here.
Hmm.
Um, and again, I'm not in the workplace starting these conversations, right? I'm just like trying to engage in good faith. And I don't think, I think we're being really generous if we just assume that all of the people that are doing this, the trans activists, are doing this with good intentions. I think they're certainly weaponizing a lot of this. So
Well, the whole reason I started this YouTube channel was because I was concerned about how this was going to impact the mental health field and the patients and clients who are coming to see people who have been trained according to this stuff, because the training is so heavy on this right now. And the selection, I mean, they select for, and I'm hearing that from professors that I speak with who've been involved in the candidate selection process for these graduate programs. They are selecting for people who are going to be in line with this way of thinking. And then once they've been selected for, they're being really, this is being incorporated into every class that they take, in addition to the propaganda that they receive from the schools. Like, I'll speak specifically about the school that I went to, but we were receiving heavy amounts of propaganda sent to us in our student emails from school organizations that were student and staff hybrid organizations. Like there's something called the Justice and Leadership Foundation at the school that I was going to, which is this social justice group. And so you're getting newsletters, you're getting offered chances to take special workshops all the time, and reminders about things like Trans Day of Remembrance, and reminders to like degender everything and use gender neutral language, that are just constantly filling up your inbox. So you're getting it in your classes, you're getting it straight from the school, and then they have the DEI course that you have to take, which is just this massive social justice, with the capital S, the capital J, training course. And it really concerns me to think that we've also just come out of this COVID lockdown that was so tremendously socially damaging to people who were terrified out of their minds of a virus they were taught to be super scared of, or a lot of people lost jobs, at least lost stability, and a lot of kids were completely out of touch with their friends for quite a long time and lost academic possibilities. And now, so you have people who are going to be more likely to be reliant on mental health resources, and the people who are staffing your mental health community centers as well as your private practices are increasingly being trained in this one way. And so the things you're talking about are exactly what I've been worried about.
Right. Yeah. And I think, your channel and a lot of other people's channels have been like so supportive of me, because I can go, oh, wait, I'm not crazy. Like, this is, other people are seeing this. And I think I wanted to like share like this mandatory training that we had to do. And it was removing barriers to LGBTQ plus individuals. And so it's an online training, and it goes through the scenario of this person going into a clinic. But it starts off by pointing out the magazines that are present. And one of them was like a parenting magazine. And so they were essentially saying that we need to start policing stuff like parenting magazines, because it reinforces heteronormativity and it might not be affirming. And
yeah, that was something that we were told a lot, was that cis heteronormativity is bad and we need to avoid it as counselors.
Right. And that's just, this is all like reified and theoretical, like conceptual frameworks or concepts. And it's like another perfectly valid worldview is we are sexually reproducing mammals who, because of the time and energy intensive process of raising a child to maturity, form bonds. And it's a difficult thing to do. And so you have parenting. That's another perfectly valid worldview. And the fact that this is in mental health is just mind blowing. And I kind of refused to do the training because it insisted that I call a man who identifies as a lesbian. And I don't even necessarily like reject that on principle, but like I insist that I get to decide who I call a lesbian, right? Because if what we're doing is just like we're doing with white and black, we're collapsing multidimensional human beings into like this flat land that's subsumed within a group, and we're to expect that they all have the same intentions, right? The same motivations, right? Like I get to decide, right? Because if it's harmful, if I start calling this person a lesbian and I know that maybe they don't have the best intentions, because, there was a LA County District Attorney who was going to put a 26-year-old man in a female juvenile facility. And
wow.
Are we helping people?
Yeah, it's I think you're touching on some really important things like the collapsing of multidimensional human beings. I love the way you phrase that because it's so true. It's just reducing people down. I've I've thought of it as like taking an amalgam and a group level identity and then trying to carve out the averages of that and place those assumptions on individuals, which just isn't, it's not, it defies everything that we know about human life, individuality.
Right.
And another thing, the another way in which the social justice ideology is retributive is this idea that you can't show a parenting magazine because it displays some, it might display um, father, mother, child, sort of heterosexual family, nuclear family dynamic, which I would imagine that even a lot of parenting magazines right now are falling all over themselves to demonstrate different kinds of parenting. But maybe it's not even the heteronormativity of it. Maybe it's the reproduction itself, the idea that you should want children. Maybe that's offensive on some level. But for whatever reason, that might be deemed not um, in I don't know, normative of things that LGBTQ doesn't want. Why would we then go out of our way to keep to put up the LGBT propaganda? Why would we demonstrate that and we can't demonstrate this? We can't even do it alongside. So we can so that's retributive. It's saying you've had plenty of time to celebrate and promote this way of being. So now it's our turn, and we're only going to focus. We're going to make the focus only on this. And if there were just some groups doing this on their own, I agree with you. I have a live and let live kind of approach to this. If people want to do this, you know, I mean, I don't have to join in. It's fine. Do have fun with that and enjoy your life and explore who you are. And but it's the fact that it's now taking the place of other kinds of education. It is becoming what we're teaching to kids. It's the way that we teach in college. It's the way that we inform our mental health profession. So it's something that's inescapable for it's a new religion of the state.
Right. And I think for me, that's like you just touched on something that I keep thinking about, this retributive or, retribution, like aspect, or, this like hostility. And again, it kind of comes out in my workplace where I'm just like, oh, cis heteronormative men. And, and it's there. And it's almost like they feel that they're justified in taking all these courses of action, whether it be bullying in the workplace or pushing out parenting magazines or, all these different things. And it's, to me, that is just such a dangerous mindset. I think we're naive if we think that this can't turn out really ugly, at some point in the future. Yeah. And that's why I kind of got to the point where I was like, I'm done, and I try to be respectful. I try to, if somebody wants to be called they, right? Like he, she, I'll do that. I'm not going to call you a neo pronoun, right? I'll ask you to call me by my Polish pronouns to affirm my Polish identity, and good luck with that. I think people are starting to see like a lot of these upper middle class white, liberals, or just upper middle class liberals in general, right? Any color, race, whatever, I think are starting to see like some of the just radical contradictions and insanity of it. There aren't really any meaningful sex differences, but you have to give this kid testosterone and suppress their estrogen. Like what? Like you just said that there weren't any meaningful sex differences, but now you're insisting that yeah. So,
Yeah, it's true. There's a lot of internal contradiction.
like I happen to be on Twitter. I'm not typically on it, but during the whole Pride Month, and there's like this footage from London of this woman screaming about rights for asexuals, and it's like nobody's like, hey, get out of my store, you dirty non-sex having mother father. You know what I mean? Like that's not happening. And it's like,
Yeah.
so I think, like I think an important question is like, what are these rights that they're talking about? Like we need to figure that out, right? Because they're talking about something different, right? And I think we got to like intuition about what it is, but, and that's power, I think, and that's, to me, it's, but again, it's just all retributive and, yeah, just not coming from a healthy place at all.
No, it's not. And what you're when you're saying like this woman screaming about rights for asexuals and feeling like somehow her rights are not being respected or whatever it is that she's looking for, and you wonder what does she mean by that? Does she mean is she conflating the idea of rights with the idea of acknowledgement? Does she want some kind of protected status, and that's what rights equals now for these for people of this mindset? It's not human rights, it's give me some extra credit, give me some societal bonus.
Right.
And and it's very similar to the conflation of like in your earlier example of what you were accused of harassment over was the you're saying they want you to agree that making certain rules that constrict the ability of doctors to practice this gender medicine with minor clients is the same thing as trans as not being allowed to be trans, being illegal to have a trans identification. And so there's like this linguistic I don't know, it's like they're conflating things. It's like false equivalencies that are being done, and I'm hearing them all the time now. It's this creep that's come into this culture.
Yeah, that concept creep. And I don't know, there's a good book by George Lakoff. He's like a linguist. And he wrote a book called Don't Think of an Elephant. And it was all about how the Republican Party used terminology and just repeated it. And to where that kind of really shaped, discourse. And they spent a lot of money on figuring out ways to utilize language to shape the public discourse. And I think that's what they're doing. But again, if you just like kind of like just step back and just, I don't know, look at what is actually happening. But again, most people are just like, they have their cell phones and they have their MSNBC, and then it's like, oh, that makes me feel good, or that makes me feel angry. And, like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where are you? Do you mind saying where you
Okay.
are with the complaint that has gone forward from the second complaint that was actually the prior complaint? Did that wrap up and resolve in your favor, or is that still outstanding for you?
That's still outstanding. I haven't heard anything um, in like 2 weeks, maybe 10 days. So it's like up in the air. I have no idea.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
And is the company a private company or is it a state or city funded like governmental agency?
Yeah. So it's a nonprofit and it's funded through grants from state, county, municipal, and federal grants, right? And
Mhm.
Medicaid type stuff.
Well, it's so interesting that recommending a book like The Coddling of the American Mind results in someone needing to be coddled. Um,
Right.
well, thank you again for taking the time to have this conversation with me. And I really appreciate your perspective on what's going on with this. It's really, really concerning that
Yeah.
you're seeing these things happen in the mental health field.
Yeah.
And do you have any final thoughts you want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah. I was just going to say that these are the entities that are getting money from the county and the state and municipal governments to help people get into housing, to help treat their addictions, to help treat their mental illnesses. And, there's a lot of focus in Portland on the county and municipal government's dysfunction. I think people need to take a broader and deeper look at what's happening and see how the people that are actually receiving the funds and yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly important thing to focus on. And thank you so much for calling this to our attention. And I wish you the best of luck in resolving this and figuring out how you're going to respond in your own career. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, thank you.